जितनी दफ़ा मैंने सऊदी अरेबिया का नाम लिया है इस शो में, आप लोग सोचते होंगे कि मैंने क्यों लिया। आप ये देखें कि मियाँ नवाज शरीफ को रखा किसने, मियाँ नवाज शरीफ को पूरे ख़ानदान के साथ लेके कौन गया यहाँ से, मियाँ नवाज शरीफ की वापसी किसने कराई, जी सऊदी अरेबिया ने। अब सवाल ये पैदा होता है, ये खादिमुल हरमैन है या खादिमुल अमरीकैन है। मैं आपको चंद हकाइक बता देता हूँ, आप लोग खुद फैसला कर लें। 1991 में जब अमरीका ने कुवैत जंग में इराक के ऊपर हमला किया तो हवाई अड्डे और ज़मीनी रास्ते तमाम के तमाम सऊदी अरेबिया ने जो है उनको प्रोवाइड किए थे। यहाँ तक कि जब इराक के न्यूक्लियर रिएक्टर के ऊपर इजरायली एयरफोर्स ने हमला किया तो उस वक्त सऊदीज के पास एवैक्स आ चुके थे, अमेरिकन एयरफोर्स के जो थे, और उन्होंने इजरायली प्लेन्स को पकड़ लिया, डिटेक्ट कर लिया, लेकिन उन्होंने ना इराक को वार्न किया ना उनको रोकने की कोशिश की। 1998 में इराक पर बगदाद पर बमबारी के लिए अमेरिकन जहाज सऊदिया की सरजमीन से उड़े और मुसलमानों का कत्लेआम हुआ। 2001 में एक बार फिर अमेरिका ने सऊदी अरब से अफगानिस्तान पर हमला किया और सऊदिया की फिजाई हदूद मुस्लिम ममालिक पे हमलों के लिए अमेरिका को हमेशा मैसर रही। 2003 में इराक पर हमले के लिए एक बार फिर सऊदिया ने अमेरिकियों के लिए अपने हवाई अड्डे और ज़मीनी अड्डे जो हैं वो फराहम किए। 2009 में यमन पर अमेरिकन ड्रोन हमले सऊदी अरेबिया से शुरू हुए। 2010 में ईरान पर मुमकिना इजरायली हमले में सऊदी फिजाई हदूद इस्तेमाल करने की इजाज़त दे दी गई और एक बार फिर 2013 में शाम पर अमेरिका की जानिब से हमले में सऊदिया की मुकम्मल हिमायत का ऐलान किया गया। खुद अमेरिकन और खुद जॉन पार्किंस क्या बताते हैं कि सऊदिया ऐसा क्यों करता है। वॉच दिस।
In 1971, the oil countries, OPEC, flexed its muscle primarily because it didn't like our policies in Israel and cut down oil supplies to the United States. I think there's a few of you in the audience who can remember the long lines of cars at gas stations, the tremendous fear that we were going to have another depression like the one of 1929. And the U.S. Treasury Department came to me at that time and a couple of other economic hitmen and said, this is unacceptable. What kind of a plan can you devise to make sure this never happens again? Well, we knew that the key was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had more oil than anybody else in the world, and we knew that the House of Saud, the royal family, was corrupted and corruptible. And so we zeroed in on Saudi Arabia. It's a long, fascinating story on how we made this plan work, including some interesting things we did, pimping and all kinds of things that are described in detail in the book. But to make that long story short, the plan we came up with, and which Saudi Arabia accepted, was that Saudi Arabia would send most of its oil money, petrodollars, back to the United States, investing them in U.S. government securities, which it has done to the tune of many trillions of dollars. And the U.S. Treasury Department would be given control over all the interest earned on these government securities and would use that interest to hire U.S. companies to build projects in Saudi Arabia. Those projects were things like salinization plants, big power plants, highways, ports. Huge cities rose out of the desert in Saudi Arabia, and we did it in a westernizing way. We have turned Saudi Arabia essentially into a westernized country. I should back off a little bit and say part of the way we convinced the House of Saud to do this was to let them know that if they didn't do it, they would go the way of Mossadegh. So you offer them a good deal, you know, and if they did do it, we'd keep them in power. Part of their deal with us was that they would assure that the price of oil will remain within limits acceptable to us for as long as they're in power, which they've done. They are able to do that because they control so much of the world's oil. So this amazing deal was struck with the House of Saud, which has more blowback because right now the House of Saud is under a lot of pressure. It's very unstable. It's very unpopular. A great many Muslim people are extremely angry at them because the most sacred country in the Muslim world has been westernized. Medina and Mecca are surrounded by westernized places. And a lot of people, including Osama bin Laden, are really angry about this. But in the meantime, all these years, we've been able to keep the price of oil where we wanted it, and we've protected the House of Saud. So this was a tremendous success for us economic hitmen. I was in Saudi Arabia putting this deal together. It was one of our greatest success stories, and we figured we could do this now in Iraq. So we went to Saddam Hussein and explained this plan to him and told him that we'd do the same thing with him, but he didn't buy. And I don't know why he didn't buy. Maybe just because he's crazy. I really don't know why he didn't buy. But he didn't buy. Had he bought, make no bones about it, have no doubts about it, had Saddam gone along with our plan, had he bought the deal, he'd still be head of state of his country, and we'd be selling him all the airplanes and all the tanks and probably chemical plants that he wants, because we've done it to a lot of other people like the Shah and many others. But he didn't buy. So we sent the jackals in. But the jackals couldn't get through to Saddam. His bodyguards were too loyal. Torrijos' bodyguards had been trained at the School of the Americas by American officers. And it was easy to get through to them. You know, it's a good story that, you know, people like that look to their bosses, their trainers, as the ultimate, you know. So if the bosses come back and say, assassinate the guy you're supposed to be guarding and we'll pay you a lot of money to do it, who's the most dangerous man around? The guy that's carrying the guns. If you've got bodyguards, you better make sure they're very, very happy with you, because they got the guns. But Saddam's were loyal. And he had a lot of doubles, too, so even his bodyguards often didn't know who the real Saddam was. So we didn't get through to him. So the third line of defense came into play, the military, 1990. We attacked. Thought Saddam had been sufficiently chastised at that point that the economic hitmen went back in, failed again, jackals went back in, failed again, military went back in. You know the story. That's pretty much, you know, a brief kind of history of what's been going on since World War II, this empire building. And in a way, it started innocently.
जी, और ये आपने जॉन पार्किंस के मुंह से सुना है, जो खुद बता रहे हैं कि मैं सऊदीया में गया, मैं इराक में गया और मैंने ये डील वहाँ पे की है, मैं नहीं कह रहा.